Good evening. The Republican Party today gave up on Richard Nixon. Its leader in the House, John Rhodes, reversed himself and announced he will vote for impeachment Article 1. All 10 of the president's defenders on the House Judiciary Committee abandoned him. And John Tower of Texas estimated that most Republican senators now favor the president's removal. The president himself, however, is stonewalling it, telling his cabinet he will not quit. Robert Pierpoint reports from the White House.
The cabinet meeting was hastily convened. Vice President Ford, for example, had to cancel a noon speech to attend, and rumors spread throughout the city that the president was preparing to resign. But when reporters and photographers were called in for a brief glimpse before the session started, President Nixon seemed in good spirits and all else appeared normal. Afterward, as an unusually large crowd of people gathered at the White House gates, reporters swarmed around emerging members of the cabinet, who said the president intends to stay on and wants them to do likewise.
The foreign policy of the United States has always been conducted and will continue to be conducted on a bipartisan basis in the national interest and in the interest of world peace. And this will be our attitude, and we will do it.
The president expressed a firm resolve to not have this tragedy of Watergate obscure not only the accomplishments of the past, but our resolve in solving all the problems of the future. And that's what we cabinet members intend to do, just to continue to work on the problems that face our country.
Everybody's staying on. We've got a lot of work to do.
Did he say to go through a Senate trial?
He's going to go through the constitutional process.
Did he expect
that calls for Senate trial? I assume that's what he will do.
Did he say expect to win in the Senate?
He is going to see what happens when that time comes. I assume he's going in hoping that he's going to come out all right. Yes.
Did he concede the possibility that he might be convicted in the Senate?
No, he did not. No, he did not.
Privately, however, one cabinet member was overheard declaring the jig's up. And others in the official family indicated they feel that it's no longer a question of if, but when the president departs. Presidential spokesman Gerald Warren confirmed that Sunday at Camp David, President Nixon had discussed the option of resignation with some of his aides. And Warren himself would no longer categorically rule resignation out. Robert Pierpoint, CBS News, at the White House.
Republican National Chairman George Bush put out a statement late today advocating neither resignation nor impeachment, but commiserating with those who had in good faith defended the president. In the House of Representatives, the talk was considerably more harsh. Bruce Morton reports.
House Republicans in droves today said the president should resign or that the House should hurry up and impeach him, or both. One measure of the president's fall, 10 Judiciary Committee Republicans voted against all the articles of impeachment. All 10 will now vote for the article charging obstruction of justice over Watergate.
I feel let down that as a member of the Judiciary Committee, I was in a position of having to do battle and not have all the evidence.
We asked, and I did, for direct evidence, and he gave it to us. He's admitted it, and there isn't any way you can defend an admission of that type.
I had clients lie to me. That's not infrequent, and in the back of my mind, I guess I always knew something like this could happen, although I had no reason to think it would.
I now have completed that last gap that I said I would do. If the evidence were available, it is available. So I'm prepared to vote to impeach.
The House Rules Committee approved television coverage of the impeachment debate today amid embarrassed jokes. Will there be a debate? Could we impeach the president by unanimous consent without a single member objecting? Republican leader John Rhodes added his voice to the impeachment chorus.
The principle is no person, whether he be rich or poor, black or white, ordinary citizen or president, is above the law. Cover-up of criminal activity and misuse of federal agencies can neither be condoned nor tolerated. And as long as we adhere as a nation to this principle, our nation will remain great and strong.
After meeting with Democratic and Republican leaders, House Speaker Carl Albert refused to move up the start of the impeachment debate set for August 19th, but did say it would be shortened, perhaps 4 or 5 days instead of 2 weeks.
This is one of the most important things we've ever done in this House. And we are not going to have any summary operation.
Plenty of Republicans will still argue the president's case on the other two articles of impeachment. But on Watergate, Mr. Nixon's friends are very few. One still loyal is conservative Indiana Republican Earl Landgrave, who said today, "I'm sticking by my president, even if he and I have to be taken out of this building and shot." Bruce Morton, CBS News, Washington.
If the president's chances of surviving an impeachment vote in the House are close to zero, the odds of his acquittal in the Senate are probably not much better. But most senators still hope the trial will never reach them. George Herman reports.
While Democrats largely maintained a discreet silence, Republicans voiced their agony to newsmen and to each other. After they met behind closed doors for lunch, John Tower of Texas emerged to say that in his opinion, a majority of Republican senators feel the president should resign in the national interest.
Their view is that it would be best for the country, regardless of the outcome of an impeachment trial. They feel that it would be a wrenching experience that perhaps would produce a leadership gap, a weakened president, and that the country is better served by resignation. That's their rationale.
Tower says the Republicans feel the president still does not understand the hazards of a Senate trial, and they'll try to get word to him after a cooling-off period of 2 or 3 days. Senate Republican leader Hugh Scott missed the meeting, and he declined to give his own feelings.
My opinion has been that as a member of the leadership, I should not embarrass any of them without prior consultation.
And soft-spoken George Aiken, dean of the entire Senate, spoke for a number of his Republican colleagues when he refused to issue a direct call for the president's resignation.
I'm not his advisor. In fact, I can't recall having been asked for advice on any of this matter. But if he should resign, it would, of course, bring a big sigh of relief up here on the Hill.
One final indicator of the rapid erosion of support for the president, Republican Howard Baker, who repeatedly asked witnesses at the Watergate hearings, what did the president know and when did he know it, expressed particular distress at yesterday's revelation of the early presidential use of the CIA, calling that a stunning disclosure. Said Baker, "I know now some of the things the president knew, and he knew them a long time ago." George Herman, CBS News, Washington.
The choice for President Nixon seems to be narrowing to an impeachment trial with a high risk of conviction or voluntary departure from the White House. More on this from Dan Rather.
If the president continues to insist upon a Senate trial and the Senate votes to remove him from office, Mr. Nixon would receive no pension and could be forced to face civil and criminal charges in the courts. If he resigns, he would receive $60,000 a year pension for life, plus up to $96,000 a year in allowances for staff salaries and office expenses, plus free office space for himself and his staff for the rest of his life. Mrs. Nixon, should she survive her husband under these circumstances, would receive a $20,000 a year pension for the remainder of her life. There are differing opinions as to whether Congress can legally pass a special law exempting the president from court prosecution should he agree to resign. The Senate Republican whip, Robert Griffin, today suggested such a law. Members of the president's staff have explored, at least tentatively, the possibility of getting such a law passed quickly if Mr. Nixon agrees to resign, or having a gentleman's agreement with Congress and with Vice President Ford that the president, if he resigns, would not be pursued in the courts. The president's Senate friends reportedly have indicated they believe they could get such a gentleman's promise if Mr. Nixon agrees to resign soon. They are reported to have warned that the longer he waits, the more difficult it may become to make such an arrangement. Now, there is one other possibility. Mr. Nixon could take advantage of the relatively new 25th Amendment to the Constitution and, without giving up the presidency, temporarily turn over to the vice president the day-to-day operation of the executive branch, in effect, take himself off of the line. This amendment was adopted primarily to take care of a case of a president becoming seriously ill, but there's no requirement that the president be hospitalized before invoking provisions of the 25th Amendment. Mr. Nixon is said by his staff, quoting his doctors, to be in excellent health and to not even have considered the possibility of the 25th Amendment. His official position, as of today, is he will risk a Senate trial. Up to the moment of actual conviction by the Senate, should his case come to that, the president retains the option of resigning and collecting that pension. Dan Rather, CBS News, Washington.
In announcing the release of the latest taped transcripts, President Nixon said some of the remarks would be at variance with some of his comments of the past. Fred Graham has examined some of those variances.
It was not until March 21st of this year that I received new information from the White House counsel that led me to conclude that the reports I had been getting for over 9 months were not true. On that day, I launched an intensive effort of my own to get the facts and to get the facts out.
Until yesterday, President Nixon's basic Watergate defense, repeated innumerable times, was that he didn't know about the cover-up until John Dean told him about it on March 21st, 1973. That basic defense seems to have been demolished by the disclosure that the president ordered his aides to impede the FBI's Watergate investigation for the stated purpose of concealing the fact that the burglars were paid with Nixon campaign funds. Under the law, interfering with an FBI investigation can be obstruction of justice, a felony. But almost as damaging are other disclosures in that June 23rd conversation revealing a pattern of lies and distortions by Mr. Nixon and his men about Watergate.
I knew that the Justice Department and the FBI were conducting intensive investigations, as I had insisted that they should. The White House counsel, John Dean, was assigned to monitor these investigations, and particularly to check into any possible White House involvement.
But the transcripts show that 6 months before, H.R. Haldeman told the president that Dean was in on the cover-up. Haldeman. John Dean analyzed very carefully last night and concurs now with Mitchell's recommendation that the only way to solve this, and we're set up beautifully to do it, that the way to handle this now is for us to have Walters call Pat Gray and just say, stay the hell out of this. Mr. Nixon insisted he knew nothing of John Mitchell's involvement.
Could you tell us, sir, why you did not ask Mr. Mitchell what he knew?
For the very simple reason that when I talked to Mr. Mitchell, and I saw him often in that period, that I had every reason to believe that if he were involved, if he had any information to convey, he would tell me.
But the transcripts show that 6 days after Watergate, the president was told about Mitchell's role. President Nixon. Well, what the hell? Did Mitchell know about this? Haldeman. I think so. I don't think he knew the details, but I think he knew. Haldeman has denied under oath any role in the cover-up.
I had no personal motivation to cover up anything because I had no personal involvement, and I knew the president had no involvement.
But the transcripts show that Haldeman was in the thick of things on June 23rd. Haldeman. Now, on the investigation, you know the Democratic break-in thing, we're back in the problem area because the FBI is not under control. And you seem to think the thing to do is get them to stop. President Nixon. Right, fine. It's being asked, why did the president make public such damaging transcripts? CBS News has been told that James St. Clair, the president's lawyer, threatened to resign unless Mr. Nixon released the transcripts and stated that Mr. St. Clair had no knowledge of the untruths in the president's earlier defense. In his own book, 6 Crises, President Nixon wrote of the Alger Hiss case as follows. Hiss, a lawyer himself, had made the fatal mistake no client should ever make. He had not told his own lawyer the full truth about the facts at issue. Fred Graham, CBS News, Washington.